How do you assess the general state of the economic situation in Ukraine in a year and a half after the full-scale invasion in Ukraine? Can we say that there is a trend towards its improvement, or maybe we're still very dependent on the help of our partners?
Both are correct. The economy contracted about 30% GDP terms, real GDP terms, by the end of 2022. So in the first year of the full-scale invasion, 1/3 of the economy is gone. But we expect about maybe 5%. There are different forecasts, but basically we expect economic growth this year and we expect economic growth next year in the single digits, which is a sign that the economy is adjusting and is able to improve over time. But it is true that without international support, without the support of the allies, the Ukrainian economy would be in a very difficult state.
Among well-known demand from our financial partners, first of all, is the fight against corruption, number one. Number two, strengthening the democracy in Ukraine. And Ukraine, especially recently, has demonstrated a pretty much good situation with it, success even in these areas. Will this affect the level of our cooperation with our allies or our partners?
Well, so it's complex because partners and allies, they all have different views and opinions, and there's internal dynamics within them. Even if we separate IFIs, international financial institutions, well, they have their own donors, and that's sovereign countries, and they have their own views. There's some disagreements and some agreements among them. So it's actually not a very simple question. I mean, of course, it's simple to say corruption reforms democracy, but when it comes to specifics and timing, there are a lot of disagreements. Conditionality will be there. Conditionality means that money in exchange, not just as a support, but in exchange for certain changes in legislations, more alignment with the EU, first of all. A part of this, of course, as a threat throughout is anti-corruption efforts. But again, that needs to be done much more specific. We are talking about accountability, transparency, best practices.
So the amounts of assistance is huge. Sometimes it sounds like scaring even. Does our government have an understanding how to pay this money back?
So some of it is grants, some of it is loans. In terms of grants, a lot of support comes in kind. For example, it could be actually weapons and ammunition. Or let's say in the most recent appropriation request by the Biden administration, a lot of funding is going directly back to Pentagon or to the industry. So only much smaller amounts than we see in the news go directly to Ukrainian support and even less to the economic support. There's more economic support coming from the EU partners and especially from the Ukraine Facility Program. That's $50 billion over the course of several years until 2027. Most of it is loans. From the EU, typically...
Are there any guarantee we will get this money?
It's likely we're going to get this money. The facility itself is essentially approved. The question is to create budget or finance it, and for that we need agreement of all the EU countries. Well, there are ways to bypass that, by the way, but Brussels will try not to do it. But we have seen that there are political issues. For example, Hungary from time to time tries to leverage its ability to put a veto power on disbursing the aid to Ukraine.
Maybe my next question sounds a little bit naive, but let me ask you, why don't we negotiate to write off at least some of that, like other countries did? The war is a sufficient condition for this.
So a lot of funding is very, very long term and is essentially 0%. Definitely under inflation. So there's no need to discuss the issue of repayment right now. In 10,
but it's
20,
better
30,
not to pay at all.
Well, I don't know. I think that's bad to start arguing that we're going to, not pay because we want to build a reputation of responsible partner for the financial markets.
But who will pay? Our next generation will pay all this debt.
Again, I think de facto this money has negative real interest rates because inflation is higher than the interest rates we have to pay. So it's like we're being paid.
So it's convenient for us to get this money, even if it is really big money.
Yeah, so we need this money for defense, we need this money
definitely.
for economy. But if we are serious about restructuring of the debt and writing off some of it, will that happen? Well, it might or might not. It's likely to happen depending on how long the war goes on and how difficult the economy situation is, and also how much money is needed for defense. And restructuring happens, countries do that, especially in tough situations. In this case, what's very clear is that it is not a fault of Ukraine. It's a very morally clear situation, and it's a very economically clear situation. You are correct that it would be better for Ukraine and for the world if these were grants. Might not be obvious, but there's a political component to that. This discussion about restructuring, writing off, interest rates, the total debt, will always take a political color to it,
It's always
once the war is over. And so that provides opportunities for populist and regressionary forces to try to gain ground, arguing exactly that we shouldn't pay the West back, or the West is trying too much, to leverage us too much, or something else. So these discussions have to be managed carefully, because even before the war, we have seen that narratives, and Russia exploited some of them, and some populists have exploited some.